A soldier rescues a millionaire's son from a brutal kidnapping plot. But the truth behind it brings him to tears. Not because of the wounds, not because of his past, but because of one sentence. The child whispered a sentence that turned his entire life upside down. Who is this boy? Why did he call a total stranger Dad? And what could possibly shake a man who had survived war to his core? Sir, please help me. The scream shattered the quiet of the northern Boston woods, a place Daniel Reed walked every afternoon. On a pine-covered trail, he moved at a steady pace, a small backpack slung over one shoulder, a water bottle in hand. His daily exercise wasn't about staying in shape, it was about keeping his mind from unraveling. That scream wasn't a prank. No adult voice followed. It was a solitary, desperate cry. Daniel stopped, listened, a heartbeat. Then he turned and ran straight into the underbrush. Through the thick branches, he saw it, and his body froze for a split second. A black truck, parked just at the forest's edge, back doors wide open. A tall man, in a hooded sweatshirt, was dragging a small boy toward it. The boy's mouth was taped, his eyes wild with fear. A few feet away, another man held a stun gun, ready. Daniel didn't hesitate. He reacted the way he used to before he left the uniform behind. The water bottle dropped. His right hand reached to his belt, pulled a folding knife. 3 strides low and fast, he launched like a shadow. The first man never saw him coming. A hard knee to the gut. A sharp twist to wrench the man's arm off the boy. The child tumbled to the ground. The second man flinched, fired, but the veteran soldier had already moved. He dove to the side, his knife spun through the air, slashing the man's arm. The stun gun clattered to the ground. Daniel grabbed the boy. "Run into the woods," he ordered. The boy hesitated. Daniel's voice hardened. "Now." This time, the boy listened. He disappeared into the trees. Daniel stepped back, ready for another attack. But both men were already on the ground, groaning, defeated. 12 minutes later, sirens echoed from the east trail. Daniel stood still in the clearing, arms raised. His sleeves were soaked with sweat and blood. Not his own. "Drop the knife," an officer shouted through a bullhorn. "It's over there, on the ground," Daniel replied firmly, voice low and rough. The police captain stepped forward, eyes scanning the scene, 2 unconscious men, a bloodied knife, drag marks in the dirt, and a young boy being comforted by paramedics near the ambulance. The boy pointed. "He saved me." A sleek black SUV pulled up. The door opened. A woman in a business suit stepped out, high heels sinking slightly into the damp soil. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a sharp, unshaken clarity. "Sophie Laval," the officer said, "the boy's mother." Sophie rushed forward. "Where's Leo?" "Safe," the officer replied. "He's okay. As for this man..." She looked at Daniel. "Who are you?" "Daniel Reed," he answered. "I don't know the boy. I was just out walking." Sophie stared at the worn coat, the mud-caked shoes, the soldier's eyes. Something made her hesitate, part intuition, part instinct, from having worked in a world where good people weren't always easy to recognize by appearance alone. "We need you to come to the station and give a statement," the officer said. Daniel nodded. "I'll cooperate." Just then, Leo broke free from the paramedic's grasp and ran straight toward him. The boy wrapped his arms around Daniel's leg without a trace of hesitation. A 6-year-old, just rescued from a kidnapping, running to a complete stranger. "I'm okay now. You were there." The entire security team stood stunned. Sophie was frozen. Her son, who had always feared strangers, who didn't even warm up to his own nanny, was now clinging to a man with no name, no history. Daniel knelt, gently placing a hand on Leo's shoulder. "You did great. But now, you need to go back to your mum." Leo turned to look at Sophie. "Where are you going?" Just to talk. It's going to be okay." Daniel stood, his eyes meeting Sophie's. "I don't know your son. I just acted the way anyone would, who's seen this happen too many times and done nothing." Sophie held his gaze. She sensed something, not threat, but a kind of old sadness buried deep within that steady look. "This time," she said softly, "your instinct saved my son's life." Daniel glanced at the boy one last time before stepping into the police car. But in that moment, the way Leo looked at him, wide-eyed, unblinking, it hit him hard. His heart skipped. He didn't know why. But that boy looked heartbreakingly familiar. After Daniel finished giving his statement at the police station and the doctor confirmed that Leo hadn't suffered any serious injuries, Sophie walked over to him, her face no longer carrying the hardened expression it had before. "Leo refuses to leave the medical station unless you go with him," she said quietly. "He's been through too much, and he doesn't trust anyone but you." Daniel paused for a moment, saying nothing. He wasn't used to being needed, especially not by a child he'd only met a few hours earlier. "I know this is all strange," Sophie continued, her voice softening, "but I really want to thank you. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to invite you to our home, just for one night. There'll be a doctor on site, a proper place to rest, and Leo would feel more at ease." Daniel looked at her, then turned his gaze to Leo, who was holding tightly to the housekeeper's coat, his eyes still swollen but lighting up as they met Daniel's. "All right," Daniel said. "Just one night." The SUV moved through a quiet forest road, heading toward Westmore, the neighborhood where Boston's upper class resided. No one spoke during the drive. Sophie sat in the front seat, whispering into her phone. Daniel sat in the back, next to Leo. The boy kept glancing up at him from time to time. "Are you okay?" Leo asked softly. Daniel gave a faint smile. "I'm fine. How about you?" "I think if you hadn't been there..." Leo hesitated, then fell silent. Daniel gently squeezed the boy's shoulder. "It's okay. It's over now." Laval Estate, 9:30 p.m. As the iron gates opened, Daniel instinctively tightened his grip on the seat's armrest. The mansion appeared between the trees, eerily quiet. The driveway lights flicked on automatically as the car approached. Daniel stepped out last. A housekeeper opened the door. They didn't greet him by name, just looked at him like a stranger entering a world that had long been closed off. Sophie led him into the living room, a spacious modern space with a cold palette. White, grey, black. Abstract paintings hung on the walls. The gas fireplace glowed softly, warm, but unable to chase away the lingering emptiness. Leo was taken upstairs by the housekeeper, Clara. The boy looked back over his shoulder. "Don't go anywhere, okay?" "I'll stay a while," Daniel replied. Sophie gestured for him to sit, then disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, she returned with 2 cups of hot coffee. "Thank you for not turning us down," she said, setting a cup in front of him. "I know you could have walked away after helping us." "And leave behind a kid still shaking," Daniel said, taking the cup. "That's not my style." She sat down, leaning back slightly. "You used to be in the military." "I did." "The way you moved fast, precise, without hesitation. That's not how regular people react." Daniel simply shrugged. Sophie watched him for a moment. "I have a question. I hope you don't find it strange. Go ahead. Why did my son trust you the moment he saw you?" Daniel paused for a few seconds. Then he said, "I'm not sure. But when I saw him, I felt like I'd seen that face somewhere before." Sophie frowned. "Where?" Daniel looked her straight in the eyes. "In a dream." She let out a soft laugh, though it wasn't clear if it was out of nervousness or discomfort. "I'm not superstitious, but That answer is enough to keep me up at night. Daniel glanced around the room. A photo on the wall caught his eye. In it, Leo was about 3 years old, holding a wooden toy airplane and grinning from ear to ear. Daniel stood up and walked over. His expression suddenly darkened. He reached out and gently touched the glass frame. This airplane. David Leo's father made it for him, Sophie said from behind. He passed away 3 years ago. Car accident. Daniel gave a slight nod, but his hand remained on the frame. I made one just like it. Almost identical. Back when I was in the military hospital. Sophie froze. You were in a military hospital? 6th Recon Center, near Fort Detrick, back in 2018. She looked at him, something clearly flashing through her mind. Daniel sat back down. Could be just a coincidence. Or maybe not. A moment later, Sophie stood up. Leo won't fall asleep unless he hears your voice. Would you mind going upstairs for a bit? Not at all. Upstairs, Leo's bedroom. Leo was sitting on the bed, drawing with his knees pulled up. When he saw Daniel, his face lit up. You're here. Daniel sat down at the edge of the bed. Still awake? I was waiting for you. The boy handed him a drawing. It was a picture of Daniel pulling him out of the black car. The man's face was drawn with big eyes, thick eyebrows, and a torn coat. You're really good at this. My teacher says I have a big imagination, but today, it wasn't imagination. Daniel gave a quiet chuckle. Leo tilted his head. Do you have any kids? Daniel froze. I did, but when my child passed away. Leo didn't say anything. He just pulled his pillow closer. Then, can you be my pretend dad tonight? Daniel looked at the boy for a long moment. Yes. Leo leaned into his shoulder. A few minutes later, he was fast asleep. Daniel stepped out into the hallway and closed the door gently behind him. Sophie was already there, leaning against the railing, waiting. Thank you, she said, without looking at him. I don't know what's going on, but Leo has never trusted anyone like that. Daniel gave a small nod. She turned and looked up at him. Are you sure? We've never met before. But maybe I once dreamed about you. Sophie fell silent. In her study, Sophie opened an old drawer and pulled out a photograph taken at a military hospital 6 years ago. Behind her shoulder, among a group of soldiers, was a young man in a worn medical corps jacket, and though his face was blurry, the eyes bore an uncanny resemblance to Daniel's. Night settled over the Laval estate like a thick blanket, muffling every sound. Daniel lay on the spare bed downstairs, eyes wide open, staring through the ceiling, as if trying to locate something long lost. Sleep wouldn't come not from exhaustion, but because one image kept flashing in his mind. That woman, that hand, that voice. It all felt too real to be a dream. The memories crashed over him like a tidal wave, a stark white hospital room, the sharp scent of antiseptic, a slender hand pressing gently to his forehead, a calm, low female voice close to his ear. What's your name? Reed. Daniel. The young woman scribbled something down. The name tag on her white coat read, Sophie L. Daniel shot upright in the middle of the night. Cold sweat trickled down the back of his neck. He couldn't deny it anymore, but this time, it wasn't just some vague dream. On the nightstand, Sophie had placed a small bottle of antiseptic spray, the kind used in hospitals. When he picked it up, the scent hit him instantly, the exact same scent. Strangely, it triggered a memory with unsettling clarity. A delicate hand, slightly cold, touching his forehead. A steady, low voice, unhurried. What's your name? Reed. Daniel. He sat frozen, then turned toward the living room. In the dim glow of the nightlight, he saw Sophie's earrings hanging on a shelf, teardrop-shaped with deep blue stones. And then a detail that sent chills up his spine. A small hook-shaped scar behind her left ear, the same one he remembered seeing when she leaned forward to write something down in the military hospital. It couldn't be a coincidence. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the living room windows. Daniel sat silently on the sofa, watching Leo dig through a pile of books on the shelf. Sophie was in her office, the door just slightly ajar. Clara, the housekeeper, set a cup of coffee in front of him, then stepped back, quietly observing. Leo pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. A small folded piece of paper slipped out and fell to the floor. Daniel bent down to pick it up, but instead of putting it back, he instinctively unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. March 17th, a young soldier. Name, D. Reed. Woke after 9 days in a coma. His eyes looked like they had already died. Daniel's hand froze. There was no mistaking it. That was him. That was the day he came out of the coma after the explosion in Fallujah. Sophie stepped out just then, her eyes flicking quickly to the paper in his hand. She stopped in her tracks. Daniel didn't look up. His eyes stayed locked on the words. March 17th of that year. That was the day I left the recovery ward. You recorded it. You remembered me. Sophie stepped closer and snatched the piece of paper from his hand. That was just a clinical note from my internship. I cared for dozens of cases each week. Daniel looked up, eyes fixed on her. Then why write about me specifically? Just one line, one name. No other entries like it in that notebook. Sophie didn't answer. She turned away, visibly uneasy. But her silence told Daniel all he needed to know. He sighed and reached into his pocket, pulling out a worn, creased envelope, his old personal file from the military. He rifled through it and took out a sheet of paper, confirmation of his participation in a military genetic study. He held it out to her. I once signed on for a genetic research program. They asked for biological samples used for studies and possibly stored. Back then, I didn't ask questions. Just thought it was like giving blood or tissue, nothing more. He paused, eyes locking onto Sophie's. Let me ask you something. When is Leo's birthday? Sophie hesitated. December 14th. Daniel pulled out a discharge document from the military hospital. He laid it on the table beside the genetic consent form. I was discharged March 13th, 2019. Just about 9 months before Leo was born. Sophie looked down at the two documents, her lips pressed into a thin line. I also participated in a fertility support program. It was completely confidential. I never knew who the donor was, wasn't allowed to. They just gave me a sample code. I selected a profile based on immunity and antibody compatibility with my health records. I didn't think beyond that. I couldn't. Daniel looked out the window, watching Leo laugh and play with the nanny. That boy wasn't afraid of me. Didn't need time to warm up. Didn't treat me like a stranger. From the start, he ran straight into my arms, as if he knew something. He turned back, eyes red. If all this is true, if I was the donor, then Leo is my son. Sophie collapsed into a chair. For the first time, she didn't try to control the moment, didn't deny it. She was simply stunned. Daniel stepped closer, his voice slow and steady. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not making demands. But if I am that boy's father, I need to know. I need the truth. Not for me. For him. No one said a word. Behind the curtain, Clara stood frozen, eyes still, tray of tea untouched in her hands. The truth had just come out like a door thrown open that could never be shut again. And as Daniel turned to look at Leo once more, a thought struck him like a cold wind. If that child really is my son, then someone out there might want to take him away for good. Everything seemed calm again, but no one realized it was just the stillness before the next storm. The late autumn wind whispered through the trees behind the estate. The security system had just been upgraded. 360-degree motion-detecting cameras, infrared sensors along the west fence, and around-the-clock security team. But Daniel didn't trust devices. He stood on the second-floor balcony, watching with the eyes of someone who had survived dozens of ambushes. Behind him, Sophie stepped out, with a light coat draped over her shoulders. She leaned against the railing, silent for a few moments, before speaking. "I've been thinking, why Leo? Why would a 6-year-old be the target?" Daniel looked at her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm a CEO, the only woman on the National Engineering Board. I can cost competitors, contracts, sway investors. I've made enemies faceless ones. Maybe it's about money. Maybe it's personal revenge. But this time, it feels different." Daniel nodded slightly. "Doesn't feel like a standard ransom scheme." Sophie turned to face him. "They didn't ask for money. No demands. Just one message, that I can't protect my own son." He stayed silent, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. And whoever sent that message knows exactly how to play the threat game. Sophie gripped the railing tighter, her gaze turning cold. "I have a few names in mind, but only one person ever had my complete trust. And now, I'm not so sure." Daniel turned to her. "Then we start with the one you trusted most, because betrayal always begins with trust." Leo was asleep. Sophie was downstairs reviewing company files. Everything seemed quiet, until Daniel heard a faint sound, a soft click like the noise of an electric gate being tampered with. He immediately stepped into the surveillance room where a young guard was watching the monitors. The screen gave a subtle flicker. The signal was starting to break. "What the hell?" the bodyguard muttered. "They're jamming the signal. They're already inside the perimeter," Daniel said quickly, his eyes scanning each blurry camera frame. No alarm, no flashing lights. That could only mean one thing: the system had been hacked at its core. Daniel pulled a handgun from his coat pocket and spoke into his earpiece. "Clara, get Leo to the basement. Now no questions, no delay." He bolted downstairs to the first floor, where Sophie stood frozen in front of the large glass doors. "Sophie, get inside. Lock everything down." "What's going on?" "They're here." He cut her off, eyes fixed on the front yard. A shadow darted past outside. Then a soft pop. A silenced shot struck the ceiling light, making it flicker. "Where's Leo?" Sophie gasped. "Clara's taking him to the basement. It's safe there for now." Suddenly, a barrage of pounding hit the back glass doors, then the sound of shattering. Daniel kicked over a table to block their line of sight. "Stay close to me." Two men in black, their faces half covered, stormed in with laser-sighted rifles. Daniel seized the moment, lunged, yanked Sophie behind the wall, and returned fire. One of them took a hit in the leg and dropped hard. The other fired wildly. Daniel rolled behind the couch, dodging low, then sprang up and fired twice, hitting him in the shoulder and stomach. Blood splattered across the white rug. In the chaos, Daniel dashed upstairs. "Leo." "Clara! Where's Leo?" Her voice called up from the basement. "He's down here! It's locked!" A sudden explosion rocked the house from the security control room. They were blowing the data. Daniel rushed toward it, just in time to glimpse a man in a black leather jacket slipping out through a side exit. The intruder paused, staring directly into the still-active security camera before smashing it. But just before that, he left a chilling message. "You owe me, Sophie. And I'll collect with the boy." That voice froze Sophie in place. Daniel returned to find her trembling. "You know him?" She shook her head, then nodded. "Marcus. It's Marcus. My former assistant. I reported him for embezzlement. He vanished after the indictment." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "We worked together for nearly 7 years. He used to run all our tech operations. Brilliant mind, completely irreplaceable. I trusted him like family." Daniel said nothing, but his eyes darkened. "But then I found a trail of shady transactions, project funds, siphoned off into shell companies. When I confronted him, he denied everything. But I couldn't look the other way." "Sophie, was this handled?" "Yes. I submitted the evidence to the Internal Oversight Board. He was suspended, then charged. But before the trial, he disappeared. No one's seen him since. Not a trace." Daniel looked at her. "And now, he's back. Not for money, but for revenge." Sophie nodded slowly. "Because I destroyed his life. And now, he wants to do the same to mine. Starting with Leo." Daniel tightened his grip on the gun. "He's not gone. He's coming back." Right then, the sound of a child's voice rang out. "Leo." Daniel rushed down to the basement. Clara was holding Leo, his face smeared with blood. "What happened?" Daniel dropped to his knees. "It's just a scrape," Clara stammered. "He tripped, running down the stairs, hit his head on one of the steps." Daniel pulled Leo into his arms, his hands trembling. Blood stained his shirt, but the boy opened his eyes. He was still conscious. "Please, don't leave me." Daniel held him tightly, and for the first time since losing his own child, he broke down and cried. Not from fear, but because something deep inside him had awakened. The instinct of a true father. Sophie stood at the entrance to the basement, witnessing everything. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She was simply a mother watching a man hold her son like nothing else in the world mattered. The next morning. There was no sun over Boston today, just an even shade of grey hanging over the autumn treetops outside the second-floor window. A light breeze stirred the golden leaves drifting across the roof of the Laval estate, carrying with it a stillness that unsettled the heart. Inside, Sophie sat alone in her office. A thin envelope lay waiting on the desk. She hadn't slept all night. The image of Daniel breaking down beside the hospital bed, holding Leo tightly, eyes flooding, like a father reunited with a long-lost child, kept looping in her mind like a scene stuck on replay. Sophie wasn't someone who trusted intuition easily. But this time, she couldn't shake the feeling. The resemblance wasn't just in his eyes, but in his voice, in the way Leo clung to Daniel, like something deep and familiar. And then, after Clara discreetly pulled a strand of hair from Daniel's jacket, still hanging in the living room, Sophie had quietly placed it inside the envelope. Along with it, Leo's old toothbrush. No one knew. Just a truth, if it proved real, could change her entire world forever. The italicized words in the top left corner made her heart skip a beat. DNA analysis, match rate, 99.94%. Sample 1, Leo Laval. Sample 2, Daniel Reed. Sophie held the results in both hands, though it felt like she was holding something hot and foreign. She didn't know what she'd hoped for, a miracle or a denial. All she knew was that from the moment Daniel entered her life, something had shifted. Laval Estate kitchen, 9 a.m. Daniel sat alone at the marble counter, steam rising from the cup of coffee in front of him. He didn't know what Sophie was doing, didn't know how today was supposed to begin. But something was coming. He could feel it, that old instinct, the one that had helped him survive Fallujah, was creeping back. Light footsteps echoed behind him. Sophie appeared, envelope in hand. Daniel saw it in her face, not the sharp gaze of a CEO, and not even the worry of a mother anxious about her child. It was the expression of a woman, about to say something that could change everything. "We need to talk," she said. Daniel nodded and pushed his coffee cup aside. They walked into Sophie's private office. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing off the rest of the house like a different world, one that now belonged to just the two of them. Sophie placed an envelope on the glass table. Daniel didn't reach for it. He just looked at it, as if whatever was inside was something sacred and terrifying. "I'm sorry I did this without telling you first," Sophie began, her voice steady but deliberate. "I took a hair sample from your coat and one of Leo's toothbrushes." Daniel still said nothing. "I don't know why my son trusts you the way he does. I don't even fully understand why I feel familiar around you. But after everything, I couldn't keep living in this fog. I needed the truth. And this is it." Daniel took the envelope. His hand went cold as he opened the thin paper and pulled out the result. A long silence followed. He read every line, once, then again. His eyes didn't blink. His lips pressed together, but Sophie could see the way his jaw tightened, an involuntary reaction to the shock rippling through him. Daniel set the paper down, gently. Then he got up and walked to the window, looking out over the garden. "It's real?" he asked, his voice rough, like wind through dry leaves. "Yes. A match so clear, there's no mistake. You're Leo's biological father." Daniel stood there. His back was straight, but his shoulders leaned forward ever so slightly. He didn't say another word, just rested one trembling hand on the windowsill, white-knuckled. "I had a family once," he began, voice low, uneven. "A wife, a little girl. We didn't have much, but we loved each other like crazy." He swallowed hard. "They died in an accident, one I should have prevented. I was a soldier, I should have known how to protect them. But that day, I wasn't there. I was in Iraq. I was busy being a hero." He gave a short, bitter laugh, one without joy, only pain. Sophie stepped closer, but said nothing. She just stood there, listening. "When I lost them, I had no reason to keep living," Daniel said quietly. "I wandered like a ghost. There were moments I thought about ending it all. But then, I ended up at a military hospital. A young nurse looked after me. I never saw her face clearly. I thought I'd forgotten everything, but when I saw Leo, when I looked into his eyes, I knew I'd seen that look before." Sophie whispered, "And now you understand why." Daniel nodded slightly. "I gave a genetic sample as part of a research program. I thought it was just a duty, something meaningless. I never imagined there'd be an actual child." A soft sound behind them. They both turned. Leo was standing in the doorway. He clutched his wooden toy airplane, his face still bearing traces of sleep. But his eyes, they were clear, unusually alert. "Hey, mister," he said, walking in. "One of the wings is crooked. Can you fix it for me?" Daniel sat down and held out his hand. "Let's see it." Leo placed the toy in his hand and climbed onto the chair across from him, watching intently. "Did you ever have a kid?" Leo asked. Daniel looked up, and for the first time in his life, he didn't hide. "Yes, but my child's gone now." Leo looked down, fell silent for a moment, then looked up again. "So, would you maybe want to be my dad? Just for a little while, maybe?" Daniel's hands stopped moving. He looked at the boy. Those clear, innocent eyes. There was no agenda, no calculation, just a child looking for someone to hold on to. Daniel didn't answer. He pulled Leo into his arms and held him tightly, and he cried. No one could truly understand what makes a soldier, one who survived war, break down in tears like that. But for Daniel, it wasn't just Leo he was holding. He was holding his life again. Leo pressed his face against Daniel's chest quietly. "Why are you crying?" the boy asked softly. Daniel let out a slow breath. "Because I just found something I thought I'd lost forever." Sophie stood there, tears streaming down her face. She didn't try to stop them. She didn't guard herself anymore. She looked at the two of them, this broken man and the child who, piece by piece, was stitching him back together. And in that moment, something new began. Not a chapter of more questions, but one of answers that would take courage to face. It was also the beginning of something none of them ever thought they'd have again. A family. 2 days after the attack, Laval Tech headquarters, 21st floor, emergency meeting room. The large glass wall behind the meeting room offered a full view of Boston, now shrouded in a gentle rain. No one spoke. Sophie sat at the head of the table, her gaze cold as ice. The board members lined both sides of the table, anxious, tense. A few whispered about the rumors, the break-in, a stranger appearing in her home, and the terrifying fact that Leo had almost been kidnapped again. Daniel stood at the back, silent as a shadow, but his eyes sharp as a blade scanned every face in the room. "All cameras and security sensors have been upgraded," an assistant reported. "We've changed the internal access codes, but what's strange is Leo's extracurricular art class that day, it was never entered into the official system. So how did the attackers know exactly where he'd be at that time?" Sophie stared at the screen. "That means someone provided the information from inside." Daniel spoke, his voice calm and clear. "They didn't just move quickly. They operated like they had an internal map. The camera locations, the side doors, the secondary access codes. This couldn't have been done by some random outside group unless someone was guiding them." No one argued. The room fell into silence. Sophie took a deep breath. She turned toward a man in his early 50s, silver hair neatly combed at the temples, a classic wristwatch on his arm. Nathan Bowers, the chief financial officer, a longtime friend of her ex-husband and Leo's godfather. "Nathan," Sophie said, her voice steady, "what are your thoughts on this?" Nathan didn't blink. "I think if someone on the inside betrayed us, they need to be dealt with immediately. No exceptions." Daniel folded his arms. He'd been watching Nathan since the moment he walked in. There was something about the way Nathan spoke, how his face never flinched, that triggered a memory. A face he'd seen in Syria. The same eyes, the same calculated tone. That night, in the underground parking lot, level B3. No voices. Only the cold wind whistling through the ventilation grates and the dim lights reflecting faintly off streaks of water on the concrete floor. Daniel stood silently in a shadowed corner, his eyes fixed on the elevator doors without blinking. The doors slid open. Nathan stepped out, holding his familiar leather briefcase. He didn't know that the security camera on this level had been modified by Daniel with an additional recording device, small, invisible, and enough to transmit everything to a private storage drive. Nathan walked slowly toward his silver-gray Mercedes. He glanced around, like a man used to living in fear. Then he opened the trunk. Daniel held his breath. From inside, Nathan retrieved a small metal box. He opened it and took out a black USB drive marked with a strange symbol. It wasn't part of the company's data system Daniel had already checked. Just as Nathan was about to slip it into his inner jacket pocket, Daniel stepped out of the darkness. "Nathan!" The man jumped, turning sharply. His face paled for a moment, but he quickly regained composure. "Daniel? What are you doing here?" Daniel didn't answer. His gaze was locked onto the inside pocket, where Nathan had just hidden the USB. "This is my private parking space," Nathan continued, his voice tightening. "If you're trying to break in—" Daniel cut him off. "Just wanted to see what you're hiding behind that worn-out moral facade." Nathan's grip tightened on the briefcase handle. "I don't know what you're implying, and I don't have time for these emotional witch hunts." Daniel stepped closer. His expression was stone cold. "I remember the first time I met you, Military Hospital, 2017. You weren't there, because someone on your team had fallen. You were negotiating funding for a military biogenetics project. Nathan paused, ever so slightly. Daniel continued. I was one of the samples. Quick, clinical. Just a genome, a file. But you were the liaison between the Laval Foundation and the program. Nathan crossed his arms and gave a faint, sarcastic smile. I remember you. The soldier who lost his wife in an accident. The man who'd stopped wanting to live. The one I, out of pity, told the nurse to keep his file, just in case you didn't make it. Daniel's fists clenched, but he didn't move. His voice stayed even. And now, you're back. Not as a benefactor, but as Marcus's mole. A man willing to betray the company and the child I never thought was mine. Nathan raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. Daniel lowered his voice. You didn't know that? That the genetic sample back then was the key to discovering Leo is my son? Silence. Nathan swallowed hard, but forced a grin. Well, fate does have a twisted sense of humor. Daniel stepped in close. Number fate doesn't twist anything. People do. He pulled out a copy of the archival records bearing Nathan's signature under the 2019 consent form for transferring biological data. You approved the release of all stored samples to Marcus. That's how he knew Leo was my son before I did. That's how he found my weakness. Nathan said nothing. Daniel looked Nathan straight in the eye. One last time. You stood on the line between science and ethics, but you chose to sell the information in exchange for what? Money or power from someone who's dragging you straight to the bottom. Nathan didn't answer. He simply turned away, indifferent. You haven't changed, Daniel. Still, the same soldier, clinging to some fantasy of justice. And this time, you're going to lose that child too. Daniel said nothing, but his eyes made one thing clear. This time, failure was not an option. The next morning, Daniel sent Sophie a clipped recording from the surveillance camera on level B3. In it, Nathan was seen meeting a man, his face obscured, but his voice clearly caught on the mic. I want shares. I don't work for free. Daniel added a short message. He's not acting alone. And we're running out of time. Sophie sat in silence in her office. What was once a tech empire had now become a battlefield in the shadows. She knew if this didn't end soon, Leo would no longer be safe. That morning began like any other, but it wasn't like any day that had come before. Soft sunlight filtered through the backyard leaves, casting a gentle glow over the lush green grass. The garden behind the Laval estate held a sense of peace so complete, it almost fooled you into thinking that all the turmoil had passed. But no one knew it was merely the calm before the storm. Daniel crouched at the edge of the lawn, carefully adjusting the wing of the wooden toy airplane Leo had been carrying around for weeks. The boy sat cross-legged across from him, eyes focused, fingers fidgeting with a small wooden stick. Off in the distance, Clara was watering the newly planted lavender, while Sophie stood on the second-floor balcony, a coffee cup in hand, gazing down as if living out a scene from a dream she once had. Uncle Daniel, I think this wing's crooked, Leo said. Daniel frowned. You glued it on backwards. Let me flip it. There. That's better. Leo took the model, tossed it lightly into the air. The plane made a gentle arc, then glided down onto the grass. They both burst out laughing, the sound light and clear, as if it could wash away every worry. But then, a faint sound came from above. Not loud, but just enough for Daniel to know something was off. A small drone was hovering mid-air, silent as a steel bird of prey. No logo, no signal lights, not registered with any known authority. Daniel's entire body tensed like a drawn bow. He stood up in one swift motion. Clara, get Leo inside, now. Clara turned around, startled. What's going on? Don't ask. Just get him inside. Clara quickly moved toward Leo and took his hand. But just as they turned to go, a small grey van glided silently through the east side gate. Technical service logos were printed on the side. 3 people in uniform stepped out, carrying toolboxes and clipboards. "We're here to inspect the basement water system per the request this morning," one of the men spoke up. Daniel stepped forward. "No one requested an inspection today." The guy held up a clipboard. "We have a signed order from the property management office, sent this morning." Daniel didn't need to look. A strange feeling was rising in his chest. He glanced around. Leo was still standing close to Clara. Everything felt like it was about to fall apart. Suddenly, Clara froze. She let go of Leo's hand, her face draining of color. Just a moment before, a faint draft had drifted from the open toolbox the technician had just cracked, carrying an odd scent. Sharp, sweet. Clara blinked rapidly, then clutched her chest and stumbled a few steps. Her breathing turned shallow and fast. What is this?" she gasped, then collapsed onto the grass. "Clara!" Leo cried out in panic, turning toward her. Daniel lunged forward, but it all happened too fast. One of the technicians closed in and did something that made Leo's knees buckle instantly. Daniel was grabbed before he could react. A wave of dizziness slammed into him. All the sound in the world stretched away, like it was underwater. His body gave out. When Daniel came to, it was dusk. He was lying on his side in the grass. His head throbbed with pain. His hands were empty. His watch gone. Beside him, Leo's wooden airplane lay broken in 2. He stumbled to his feet. No Leo, no Clara, no sign of the 3 strange men. The yard was eerily silent, like nothing had ever happened. Daniel staggered toward the house. Inside, Clara was being treated by paramedics. Sophie had just come down the stairs when she saw him and screamed, "Daniel! Where's Leo? What happened?" Daniel was panting, his voice sharp and broken. "They came back, and this time, they took him." Sophie froze. She gripped the banister, her hands trembling. No, we increased security, Daniel. You said you'd protect him." He didn't answer. He simply turned and walked back outside. Each step heavy. His eyes scanned every corner of the yard, like he was searching for something, anything, in the wreckage. Then he stopped. Beneath the maple tree, something small had been taped to the trunk with clear tape. Daniel crouched down. His hands trembled as he peeled the paper away. Scrawled in blue crayon, the words came into focus. "Daddy, I'm really scared." Just one sentence, just 4 words. But Daniel's heart clenched like a fist around his ribs. He didn't scream, didn't lash out. But his eyes changed, like an old fire had been reignited, hotter, fiercer, and unstoppable. Sophie stepped out behind him, just in time to see the note fall from his hand, soft as the last leaf of the season. Daniel turned around. His face was no longer angry, no longer afraid. Only one thing remained, an unshakable resolve. "I'm bringing him back, even if I have to go alone, even if I have to walk into the darkest place this world has to offer." "Daniel, are you sure? This could be a trap." "If it is, then, that's all the more reason I have to walk in, because more than anyone, I know what it feels like to lose a child, and I won't let that happen again." He walked into the study, opened the steel drawer beneath the bookshelf. Inside were satellite maps, an old radio unit, and a worn wooden box containing gear from his military days. Daniel changed jackets, packed what he needed into a small backpack. His eyes lingered on a photo of Leo grinning and hugging a model airplane in the living room. He quietly took the photo down and slid it into his chest pocket. Sophie stood still. She had never seen a man preparing to leave who looked so much like he was finally coming home with pain in one hand and hope in the other. "I don't know where you're going, but if you need anything, I'm here. Don't carry all this alone. Leo needs you. I need you too." Daniel turned one last time, his eyes locking with hers before he stepped through the door. "This time, I won't lose him." Somewhere, a dark basement in the outskirts of Boston. The surveillance monitor flickered, showing Leo curled up on the cold floor, clutching a broken wooden airplane model tightly against his chest. Marcus stood before the screen, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophie's son, and the child of a soldier who was supposed to be dead both inside and out. Now, he's the final piece in this game. Nathan stepped into the room, his eyes heavy with fatigue. "The boy's been here for 2 days. If Sophie refuses to give in, what are you planning to do?" Marcus turned, his eyes like blades. "Simple. Send his body along with the transfer contract." Nathan stepped back, horrified, but Marcus gave a thin smile and exhaled sharply. "You brought Leo here, Nathan. There's no turning back." Daniel left the mansion before dawn, without a word. The morning fog rolled quietly over the road ahead like a veil, hiding the fire slowly building in his chest. Beneath the dim glow of the streetlights, he walked, not hurried, but with purpose. In his pocket, a folded satellite map, an encrypted phone reserved for emergencies, and a small photo of Leo the boy smiling with that same wooden airplane in his hands. This time, Daniel wasn't moving out of duty or instinct. He was going because of his heart, because that child had called him Dad, and he couldn't bear to lose him again. Sophie had tried to convince him to let her come along, but he had shaken his head. "You need to stay. If Marcus is after Leo, he's not letting go of Laval Tech either. If you disappear now, he wins both your son and your company." Sophie said nothing. She understood. She simply nodded, then stepped forward and handed him a backup security card. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate, no matter the hour." Daniel didn't look back. He took the card with a slight nod. The door closed behind him, and at that very moment, a soft rain began to fall. For more than 10 hours straight, Daniel didn't rest. He reached out to 3 people, 3 names the world had long forgotten, but to him, they were brothers who had once kept each other alive through gunfire. One was now in hiding somewhere in Maryland, another worked the Eastern Docks, and the third was known only by his call sign, Rook, a former signal analysis expert from their Special Operations Unit. The moment they heard the name Marcus Vale, no questions were asked. The tracking began. Traffic cameras across the entire city of Boston were swept. A silver van with a concealed license plate was picked up at a gas station on the western side of town at 7:12 p.m. The way it turned, its speed, its route Rook had enough to trace its path. It all pointed to an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city, just off Highway 3, an abandoned industrial zone left to rot for nearly a decade. Daniel arrived just past 11 p.m. The rain still fell in a light drizzle. He didn't bring heavy weapons, just a folding knife, a handheld vibration sensor disabler, and a single-channel earpiece custom-built by Rook. He moved along the back wall of the warehouse in silence. 3 guards, one posted at the front entrance, the other 2 patrolling the perimeter. Inside, flickering lights. A single overhead bulb lit up a makeshift desk with a laptop and a camera. Marcus was preparing to live stream a message to Sophie, demanding she sign over her shares in exchange for Leo's safety. Leo was in a small room at the far end of the hallway. Through the cracked door, Daniel could see the boy sitting quietly on the floor, holding a broken model airplane in his arms. His eyes were red, his face pale, but he wasn't crying. He was exhausted, but still clinging to the one thing he had left, a fragile belief that his father would come. Daniel waited for the right moment when one of the guards left his post to check a signal. Then he moved, quiet as the wind, slipping along the wall, weaving through rusted crates. At the side entrance, no camera, just a vibration sensor. He used the disabler. 7 seconds. Then he slid through the narrow opening. Not a single footstep made a sound. His shadow passed like part of the night itself. He reached the room where Leo was held. The door was secured with a simple iron latch. Daniel lifted it gently. No noise. As the door creaked open, Leo froze. His eyes widened, thinking it was a dream. But then that face, the one etched into his memory, came into view beneath the faint light. Daniel knelt, softly, slowly. "You're safe now. Daddy's here." Just 3 words. Leo burst into tears, not out of fear, but because every ounce of worry inside him had broken loose, spilling out as tears. He threw himself into Daniel's arms, clinging tightly, his small body trembling with every breath. Daniel held his son close. No words could ever capture what that moment felt like, the feeling of reclaiming a piece of your own flesh and blood you thought was gone forever. "I'm taking you out of here, but you have to stay completely quiet, okay?" Leo nodded. They backed out of the room. Across the hallway, a beam of light swept their direction. One of the guards must have sensed something. He started moving toward them. Daniel wrapped Leo in his arms and bolted down the corridor toward the maintenance door. At the far end, it had been left slightly ajar. He slipped through the opening just as the flashlight beam hit the wall behind them. Outside, in the sound of rain, the alarm went off. It was the signal Daniel had asked Rook to send to the local police, using a special authorization code reserved only for national-level emergencies. While the rapid response team stormed the warehouse through the main entrance, Daniel carried Leo through an old drainage route in the back, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat, as if every stride was a race against time. 3 a.m. The pickup truck stopped at the gates of the Laval estate. As soon as the gate opened, Daniel stepped out, Leo still asleep in his arms. No more fear, no more screaming, just a deep, real sleep after days of relentless stress. Sophie ran out. The moment she saw her son, she froze. Then, without waiting another second, she dropped to her knees and wrapped both Daniel and Leo in her arms. Tears fell silently. No one said a word. They didn't have to. Just touching each other was enough to know they were still here. They had found their way back to each other. The sky had barely begun to lighten when police cars lined the narrow road behind the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Boston. Following the rescue, Daniel handed over the entire contents of the USB he had recovered, including an audio recording of the negotiation between Marcus and Nathan, along with covert video files stored on a hard drive hidden beneath the warehouse floor. All evidence was immediately transferred to the FBI's central data center. An emergency investigation was launched, and within hours, a nationwide arrest warrant was issued for Marcus Vale and all related parties. Daniel didn't say much. He made only one request. "Let me take Leo home. The boy needs to be with his mother." The next morning, Laval Tech, just before product launch. The Laval Tech building was lit up early. In the grand lobby, the air buzzed with the footsteps of engineers, security teams, and media personnel. On the massive LED screen overhead, bold letters read, "Touch the Future, the Rebirth Edition." This product launch wasn't just a tech event, it was Sophie Laval's first public appearance since a string of devastating crises. No one knew that just hours earlier, her son's life had nearly been erased. Sophie sat silently in a private meeting room behind the stage. Outside, the murmurs of hundreds of invited guests filled the air. She hadn't spoken all morning. Her eyes stayed fixed on the photo on the table. Leo, at age 3, hugging a wooden airplane model. Her chest tightened as if something inside her were being squeezed. The door swung open. Daniel walked in, carrying Leo in his arms. The boy rested his head on Daniel's shoulder, exhausted, but no longer overwhelmed with fear. 10 a.m., main stage. The announcement chime sounded. Spotlights turned toward the stage. Sophie stepped into view, her posture calm, but her gaze revealed a profound change. She took the microphone and looked directly into the camera. I used to believe technology could save the world, but in these past few days, I've learned something else. It's truth and courage that keep a child alive, and a family from falling apart. The room fell into complete silence. Suddenly, from the middle row, a man stood up. In his hand was a thick folder, his face cold and expressionless. Nathan Bowers. "I'm sorry, Sophie," he said. "I can't stay silent any longer." The LED screen behind Sophie abruptly switched to standby mode. Nathan walked up to the stage, holding the folder high for the press to see. "These are documents I've compiled over the past 2 years. Financial irregularities, suspicious wire transfers, misuse of investment funds. I'm obligated to speak out for the shareholders and for the sake of responsibility." Sophie didn't flinch. Daniel, standing at the edge of the stage, didn't move either. Only Leo's eyes were fixed on the man he once called Uncle Nathan. The room froze. Then, a single beep pierced the silence. The LED screen flickered back to life. A video began to play. On screen, Marcus Vale, seated in the corner of a dimly lit bar. Nathan sat across from him, pale and uneasy. Marcus's voice was icy. "You either help me bring Sophie down, or I let the public know exactly where you laundered money back in 2016. I can't. Then you're going to prison. It's that simple. If I do what you say, will you let her go? When she loses Laval Tech, that's when I stop." The video ended. Gasps and horrified whispers erupted across the auditorium. Sophie tightened her grip on the microphone. Daniel stepped forward and pulled a USB drive from his pocket. "The original recording has been verified by the FBI. They're here, right now." At that very moment, plainclothes federal agents emerged from both sides of the hall. One held up his badge. "Nathan Bowers, you're under arrest for aiding and abetting threats, fraud, and endangering a minor. Please, come with us." Nathan stood frozen. He looked around, but no one stood with him. As the handcuffs clicked shut, he whispered to Sophie, "I didn't want it to end like this. I was scared." Daniel answered him with only one sentence. "You should have been scared the moment you chose to side with darkness." Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, in an anonymous rented apartment, Marcus Vale had just zipped up a suitcase and was about to remove his last SIM card when the door burst open. 4 agents stormed in like shadows. A stun gun fired straight into his chest before he could even scream. He collapsed to the floor, limbs twitching, his eyes wide open, not with fear, but with venom. As they dragged him out to the van, Marcus caught sight of a reporter's phone screen. A photo of Leo smiling, holding hands with Daniel and Sophie, the family reunited. He let out a dry, bitter laugh. They won today. But justice is just the fairy tale you people tell yourselves, to sleep better at night. Then he lowered his head and fell silent. But in his eyes, hatred still burned, quietly, undying. After the conference, main lobby Laval Tech. Sophie held Leo tightly in her arms. Daniel stood just behind her. The eyes of hundreds of reporters were fixed on them, not to pry this time, but to witness a rebirth. A reporter raised a microphone. "Ms. Laval, who is the man standing next to you." Sophie lifted her head. Her voice was steady. "He is Leo's biological father, the man who risked his life to save my son, the only person I trust right now." Leo ran to the front, grabbing both their hands. "Mum and Dad are both here now. I'm not scared anymore." Applause broke out. Sophie smiled, her first in days of crisis. Daniel bent down and embraced Leo, then gently squeezed Sophie's hand. Justice had been served. The crime brought into the light. A family once thought lost, now stood strong in the eye of the storm. And Daniel, a man who once had nothing left to hold on to, now had one reason to live: Leo. The afternoon light settled gently over the Laval porch. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the lawn, and the breeze carried a faint scent of mint from the trellis beside the veranda. The once chaotic mansion was now eerily quiet. Sophie stood by the half-open window, holding a cup of hot tea, her eyes fixed on the yard where Daniel was bent over, carefully packing his belongings into an old, weathered backpack. He wasn't taking much, just a few changes of clothes, a small picture frame, and an old notebook. Everything Daniel had lost, and had chosen to keep, now fit into a handful of items. He folded the last jacket and zipped the bag. His back was straight, but for the first time, his shoulders weren't braced, as if ready for battle. Instead, he looked like a man trying to hide a sense of reluctant farewell. Leo sat off in the corner of the yard, clutching an unfinished model airplane kit in his arms. He stared at his father without blinking, his eyes red and glassy. "Are you leaving again, Dad?" Daniel froze. The boy's voice carried no accusation, just a quiet question, as if he was testing whether the peace they'd found was real. Daniel turned to him. "I just thought you and your mum could use some space. I've already stirred up your lives more than enough." Sophie stepped onto the porch, standing beside Leo. She didn't rush in with words, just let herself be seen. A picture of mother and son, like an open door not locked, not calling him back, but not closed either. "Daniel," Sophie said softly, "if you want to go, I won't stop you. But if you truly want to learn how to be a father, we're right here." He looked at her. In his eyes, the doubt was gone. The cracks from the past had faded. All that remained was a choice. Suddenly, Leo ran to him, lifting the model airplane box toward his father. "You haven't helped me finish this yet." Daniel took it from him. His hand trembled slightly. Sophie smiled. "I can make another cup of cocoa, like that first night you stayed." The breeze passed again. Daniel said nothing. Instead of dragging his bag toward the gate, he opened it, pulled out a small toolkit, and sat down beside his son. "Let's start with the wings, okay?" Leo nodded enthusiastically. A chair was brought out by Sophie, and a warm cup of cocoa placed beside Daniel. She said nothing more. She just sat there quietly, watching father and son lean over the pieces, assembling more than just a model plane, but something far more important: a family. The sun dipped lower behind the trees. The soft, golden light of evening bathed the three figures on the porch. No one spoke of the future. No grand promises were made. But in their eyes, in their presence, the promise was already clear. We'll be here, together. Not all pain can be healed right away, but sometimes all it takes is a place to come back to, a forgiving gaze, a pair of hands willing to hold on, and what once seemed lost can be found again. And love, without needing to be spoken, is still the most powerful force that can bind three strangers into something as strong as family. There are moments that feel like chance encounters, but deep down, they're part of something greater than we can understand. Daniel, a man who had once lost everything, found something no one could ever replace. A family. Not because of blood, but because of love, sacrifice, and the kind of courage that refuses to back down. This story isn't just about a kidnapping or a breathless rescue. It's a reminder to all of us that sometimes it only takes one person, one heart, brave enough to stand up, to love again, to choose what's right for everything that seemed gone to be brought back again. What do you think about Daniel's choice? If it were, would you risk your own safety to save a child who might not even be yours? And before this video ends, let me ask you something. How have you been lately? Are you holding up okay? If you're tired, it's perfectly fine to rest. No one expects you to be strong all the time. I'm here, and I'm always ready to listen. Thank you for being here. See you again in the next story.